Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. Today we have all our insiders with us. We have Laurie from Oushinery. We have
Hi.
Nick from Wine Owners.
Hello.
Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Hi, everyone.
And Seb from Troly.
Good morning, boys and girls.
We are going to use the power of these four brains and the knowledge of years of working in wine tech to look at what are the ideas, the startup ideas, what are the crazy ideas. Ideas, of course, that if they're good, we might not even publish this, or that you can take and make your own wine tech startups if you're looking into what to do in the space. Let's start off with the challenges, the problems in different areas of wine tech. I mean, wine tech's big. We talk about it all the time. Just to give you a kind of overview again, Nick with Wine Owners deals with seller management and wine management. Jonathan at Bottlebooks deals with exchange of wine information. Oushinery deals with amazing images and creating them with computers. And Seb is an e-commerce tool with Troly, is an e-commerce tool for wineries. And then there's a number of other areas. There's production tech. There are finite areas that our businesses don't get into too much. And then there's, of course, new things that emerge all the time. Okay, let's look at some of the key challenges, the key problems that exist. Let's start off somewhere really exciting in data and infrastructure. I'm sure that's where everyone wanted to start, but I think it's good because it's kind of the backbone of how everything works. What's broken right now? I don't know. Jonathan, do you want to start in what really is something that you could see being the big challenge over the next years, something that's broken now, something that could really be a great startup area to pursue?
I think in data and infrastructure, it's a topic that affects sort of all of our businesses, which is the integration of the systems together. From an infrastructure perspective, it's been great with all the cloud services being able, I mean, most of our softwares are all based on cloud nowadays. And so to some extent, infrastructure is there when people are needed, but there's still a lot of breakages in the system in terms of exchanging information globally or even locally. And I think all of our businesses have an aspect of connecting systems to it, but we're just scratching the surface. We're just four businesses that are with four different topics, but there's so many different types of systems and countries to be connected. There's still a lot of manual information exchange out there that is costing a lot of companies a lot of time, and that costs money.
And look, that lack of integrated data ultimately has an impact on the overall movement of products, right? So we know that the industry is dominated by small producers in terms of how many producers there are, even though there's I wouldn't say a handful, but there's 100 odd companies dominating on sales, right? They own the market in terms of sales, and the lack of data is preventing those small players from having their product known to a greater circle than the 200 and 500K around their property, kind of a thing. So for a small producer to be discovered into the normal local, regional, national, and international market, that requires data, and that lack of integration, that lack of data, is preventing them from actually having their creation, their art being discovered.
Yeah, what's interesting, I just wanted to put some numbers here that I have handy, not so much related just to the world of wine, but like to the world of like consumer goods as a whole. In the last year, 12% that's what company like lost in terms of revenue due to bad data, like a study by Experian. And technically, so we're looking at the world at CPG as a whole, but that's the estimate that is about $3 trillion that IBM estimated that combined, like that's what was lost in sales because of poor product data. So it's interesting to see that these challenges, it's existing like across like multiple industries in the world of like retail and CPG, but it's, I think, extra complicated in the world of wine. So,
and look, we also have on top of missing data structures, we also have a rather subjective kind of a product. At large in the industry, it's actually really hard to compare a Pinot with another Pinot. They're different products. They have different sort of art variations from the winemaker, as opposed to a pair of shoes. If you're looking at like shoes to go in the water, for instance, yes, there are different brands, but there's not that many. And there's comparatives in materials being used. If you're looking for a jacket, there's a Gore-Tex materials, there's some Gore-Tex equivalent materials, there's different materials that are broadly used and understood. That doesn't exist in wine. Wine is very subjective. Wine is an experience. So not only is the data sources fragmented, the data transport borderline missing overall as a market. So the data opportunity is massive. The challenge is we're talking about a huge market and an enormous number of producers, an enormous number of products which change each year. So yeah, the challenge is paramount. It's huge.
Nick, do you see any technology out? What's the most promising tech? Are we talking QR codes, blockchain? I mean, are there any of these kind of technologies that are not so much future technologies that are sort of there, but just not implemented wide enough? Like, any of those could solve this issue?
I think the issues are more fundamental than things like blockchain, which clearly, you know, I think as we perhaps touched upon before, clearly has a place in terms of traceability and distribution in particular, and you know is by all accounts reasonably well integrated across certain CPG channels of supply or supply chains. But I think you know, back to Jonathan's points, I think you know we are in a fragmented market. We're in a market where we have an enormous degree of product variability. There's a lack of standardization, and there's a lack of systematic communication that takes place between the different bits of the market. So actually by concentrating and worrying about the plumbing, you know, how can we build frameworks that do a better job of connecting people up together to make the process of sourcing wine and selling wine less manual, much more embedded and systemized between the platforms that businesses use to run on. I think that is probably the first and immediate challenge, and that also, you use the word infrastructure, I think starts to build the infrastructure that's currently completely missing. There are significant gaps in any market that in any of the geographical markets, I mean, that you might choose to pick. And I think the first challenge is, how can we build infrastructure? How can we leverage businesses like Bottlebooks, like LiveX with their Elwing codes, and referential data in order to provide the common language for people to be able to then use the infrastructure, use the plumbing to systemize the buying, basically the order processing flows that are today so manual.
Is this a problem of having, you know, if you have systems that work really well, I think there is a fear that then you have big players will have more power, and there's a kind of chaotic fragmentation in the wine industry that is charming and wonderful and annoying and stops progress and all of that. Is that natural to the wine business, or is that like, I mean, is this, I always wonder if it's just about growing up, or or maybe it's a tension between two polar opposites that have good pluses and minuses.
So I kind of actually think that by having this fragmentation, by not joining the market up, it creates friction that probably is ultimately if it's to the benefit of anybody, it's to the benefit of the bigger players. It's definitely not to the benefit of the specialists and the SME part of the market. And I think that we know it's a market that's lagged and that has been slow to invest, but that there have been catalysts over the last 3 years that are reasons why more of the market is now thinking about investing, is worrying about getting left behind. And I think that the more that we can connect up sources of supply with channels of distribution and sales channels to market, the more it will help the SMEs to level up. The more it will bring money in, it'll bring capital into the market to sort these problems out and provide the rationale for smaller businesses to invest and to join up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's interesting is I think it's a topic that we're all kind of touching on, but we're also kind of skirting, which is that it's a challenge that the wine tech industry has, or wine tech companies have in general, which is convincing people to embrace digital. And so it's one thing to have the tech. There's a lot of solutions that have been built that have also disappeared because they weren't able to convert enough people quickly enough. And that's a challenge. And I think it's a challenge that is not always universal to industries. It's I think the wine industry is more resistant to change. And I think democracy is one of the characteristics of democracy is it does tend to slow things down in the wine industry. I think relationships, they have their strengths, but they also tend to slow down the change that that you in other industries. I think people would just break it, or whoever's faster is going to win, or better price, or quicker to market, and speed and price count in other markets. In the wine industry, that's not the whole picture, and that has its positives, but that when it comes to digitalization, I think it's also one of the things that contributes to slowing it down and just driving up the cost of digitalization, because it just it's decisions that would be obvious based on the business case don't get made on that basis.
All right, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Online sales. Seb, let's start off with you. What are the problems with online sales? What are the crazy ideas, the crazy things that might break through in the next years?
So there's two sides to the problem online. First and foremost, there is still that element of fragmentation. And so there are so many wine producers around the globe that consumers struggle to discover. That fragmentation also brings a very inconsistent user experience. So consumers have to go through different checkout experiences, different costs for shipping, different things. So consumers don't really have a way of just browsing through wines and trying to discover wines, which I suspect is something Vivino has got in its site. But the idea here is that if you're going direct from producer, the technology changes all the time. And so that fragmentation is really difficult. But the other angle that's extremely tricky that many have tried is, how do we enable the discovery? How do we enable a piece of technology to support a customer into discovering something new, discovering something they're going to like, discovering a product which is compared subjectively, which is experienced differently from one person to another? And how do we help consumers trust that they can buy without tasting? Right? You can buy a pair of shoes and you might want to return it. Yeah, that kind of works. You can buy a pair of shoes because you've had the same before. That kind of works as well. When it comes to a wine which you had a similar vintage 3 years ago, oh, that element of trust is not quite there, right? And then when it comes to having some sort of an AI or some sort of a pairing suggestion, or having some sort of an app to help you find a similar bottle based on different characteristics, that never really took off. That problem was never really fixed or addressed. And combined with the difficult e-commerce environment and shopping experience, it's very hard for a consumer to say, look, I'll order a case of 12 bottles, and if I don't like it, I'll ship back 11 bottles. That is not really being enabled right now. So on the consumer end, there's an enormous amount of frustration from the technology. There's an enormous amount of frustration from discovering different products without having to visit the winery. And third and foremost, there's also on the consumer side, you're looking at changing consumer preferences, changing consumer behaviors. You're looking at new packaging format. You're looking at new drink styles and drinks being organized. And ultimately, consumers are not necessarily adopting the new generation. So we're looking at the Gen Z, the Gen X, well, Gen X not really, but the new kids around the block. And they're not so interested in opening a full bottle of wine and just drinking it randomly at home. They kind of want to try a smaller version. They want to try different wines. They want to have a bit of a sample pack. So the third leg is really that the consumer habits are changing. And look, the wine industry overall, for different reason, is adapting differently to how we're dealing with that. So technology is a challenge, discovery is a challenge, and consumer behaviors are changing.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, like, one of the thing I see as well, like, especially online, is just like, how do we make wine purchasing? I think you touched a bit on that, Seb, but even further, like, less like siloed. Like, I think I was watching a webinar by Drizzly, the online sale, like, in the US, and they were saying that 80% of the non-alcoholic beverage, so effectively, pop, but that can't be called pop, like, they're elevated, as sold in orders that have alcohol in them. So they kind of add around the checkout option, are you looking as well to add this or add this? Like, it's like, and people like add 80% of the order. And for me, it was just like, wouldn't it be a great opportunity to legally, like, doing it the other way around? Like, hey, we noticed you have that in your cart. You may be preparing this dish, or you're just like, it looks like you're big into, like, you're cooking something Asian that's got like peanut sauce or whatever. Have you considered, like, this could be a great wine pairing to go, to go with what you are already showing us, not in the world of wine that you are enjoying. Like, I don't know, like, how, like the visibility, the capabilities, but I see an opportunity for the wine to go beyond taste and preference in wine or in alcohol further on the side of the user. Yeah, and fit more into their lives and their behavior.
So I'm going to
all right.
come up.
Sorry, go ahead.
Shall I come at this with a slightly different perspective? So I'm going to set aside the issues of customer experience and engagement and the ease of kind of figuring out what they like and what they don't like, because you guys have covered that very well. I think what I will touch upon is, again, to the point that this is a sort of a long tail industry, actually, what are the things that have held people back from actually having an effective e-commerce, or just just doing it justice from the perspective of their own business. And I think the big challenge has been that businesses have been really poor at data mastering. As a consequence of which, they do not have a single version of truth, as a consequence of which they can't effectively run an effective omni-channel or multi-channel strategy. And, you know, obviously, hands up, that's what we do with Wine Hub, but it is transformational if you are able to maintain a single version of the truth, master all of your data in one place, master all of your, you know, all of your product details and definitions from Bottlebooks, and you know, the critics, what the critics think of things and what other people think of things, and your bottle shots and your labels and your pricing and your discounts and just everything. Everything is in one place, and you determine what channels you're going to allocate different products to, and you just manage it centrally. All of a sudden, the overhead of managing and running an e-commerce shrinks dramatically, and it just becomes another channel that you happen to be selling through. You know, just as you know, picking up the phone's a channel, or Vivino's a channel, or whatever. So. Or Ivex is a channel for the fine wine sort of trading end of the market. So that's the bit that I think still people, you know, most businesses haven't nailed it yet, and it will transform the profitability of their e-commerce channel simply by sorting out those fundamentals.
And look, it's fascinating because it's not just wine. You're looking at, I mean, craft beers is a really good example. Craft beers has adopted technology widely in the last 20 years. And craft beers, at least in the US, is now a greater amount of sales than mass-produced beers, right? Over 50% of beers being sold are craft beers, small production beers. Beers does scale a bit more on the production front. Although when you look at cheese, well, it's the same thing with cheese. You get a few sort of a pre-packaged goods cheese on the shelves at the store, and then if you want to discover some really good cheeses, it's actually very difficult. It's very hard as a consumer to try and find one, and the technology that may or may not have been adopted by the producer is often limited. So I kind of buy in with what Nick is saying here, where ultimately it really doesn't matter what technology producers are using. They just need to use one and just try and make do with it. It's a better starting point than having nothing. And look, there is also, in the world of wine, it's probably one of the few craft products that travel around the world, right? It's very, very unlikely that you're in I don't know, in BC and you're going to find a Sydney-made craft cheese, for instance, but you could find a Pocobin Hunter Valley wine at a wine shop. So wine, on top of that, the producers are trying to develop new markets, and they don't really own their own local market. So we have a number of different layers of complexity in the scheme of things. And look, again, I think that the word here is just a technology is better than no technology, irrespective of what that technology is. And my impression is that there's a lot of, look, we're dealing with small businesses. Producers are generally a fairly small business, same as a lot of small farmers. And the idea here is a lot of them are kind of waiting for the technology. A lot of them are kind of thinking, well, this is not addressing A and B and C, it's only addressing A. And so that resistance to adoption, or the waiting period to a final technology, it could be going on forever. So adopting a technology right now today, just to try and organize your data, organize your cells, is a really good starting point.
So what about you go into the grocery store, the liquor store, the Monopoly, the wherever you buy your wine. Jonathan, what are the challenges there? What's missing in that experience for consumers? Where are the opportunities?
Wow, I think you're gonna have to cut this one out. I don't know. I don't go to the wine shop to buy wine a lot. I'll go to the grocery store, and yeah, I don't do too much on the e-com side of things, so I'm not certain where the issue is.
It's like I think
I guess that's
we've
an issue. I guess that's an issue. Is that
correct.
how do you
And look,
like?
we
I'm in the wine industry, and I've gone to one wine event this fall. So
and all of us are part of the industry, and all of us have walked into a bottle shop in the last, say, 6 months, 12 months, and the experience is always the same, irrespective of the country, irrespective of the type of shop you're walking into. Normally, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a look at the shelf and compare labels, compare prices, and you might have a look at, okay, the region, if you have a bit of knowledge about the industry. Okay, what kind of
Yeah.
a style, what kind of body, the discovery experience, due to that lack of data integration, the discovery experience has been very patchy at best. And
You,
I think, yeah, go for it, Laurie.
you know what I would love to see to experiment, and that's like, so I think it's more or less like in all like the countries we're in, but it's especially true like in North America. When you enter a bottle shop, maybe like the one run by the state, the province, or even like the private liquor stores, you enter the store, you have a little bit the categories. So maybe you have like spirit on one side, RTDs that used to be in the bottom corner that are now much more front and center because those are selling like hotcakes, and then wine. And when you go to the wine, it's just countries. Here is what Italy is doing. Here is what Spain is doing. Here is what Portugal is doing. But I would challenge, I know a little bit about wine and everything. Like I don't necessarily enter the wine store to go to my friend's dinner party and be like, Spain, I'll find a solution, like what I want to bring to my friend's table by going to the Spain section. Like I would love to see if there's other ways, like more experiential, kind of like sort the wine as an experience in the store. Just like, hey, what are you looking for? Like a chill night, weekday night, that you want to take it easy. A couple of selections. Some can be coming from South Africa, some can be the local one. Just like I don't know, like I'm still like baffled sometimes how very, very simple and totally arbitrary on attributes that I'm not sure consumers are valuing that much.
Anymore.
If anything, anymore, yes. If anything, I go by the country because I kind of have an idea of what the price point is going to be as a result. Hey, I want a cheap red, let's go Argentina, Chile. Like that's nothing to do with taste or anything like that. It's just like, oh, like this is kind of like, I know that's going to fulfill my weekday need or something. Now sound like an alcoholic, pardon me, but like, hey, like it's just like like the weekend. I want to, experience a different experience. Let's go local, or let's just go like, I don't know, I'm reminiscent of France. But it's like the country in itself is more like, well, I guess that's where I'll find what I'm looking for.
What about color? I mean, we were talking offline about you can pick your mood. There's an interface for Spotify. You can pick your color for your mood. Well, color in wine actually does tell you something. I mean, there is a kind of indication of something. I don't, it's not always perfectly accurate, but maybe it's as accurate as the average consumer, going through. And if you just ordered the color of the wine from, basically clear to deep red, wouldn't that be helpful? I don't know.
Yeah.
And look, I think you need to have a unified, or you need to have a pretty large footprint or pretty large amount of data to be able to implement such a system. The SAQ a couple of years ago launched their little color scheme, so you would see based on the color that they would put on each and every bottle what kind of a wine it was. I'm also just circling back onto what Laurie was saying. We are seeing in the world of wine, consumers are seeking natural wines, organic wines, minimum handling kind of wines. You're looking at different trends, different patterns. We're looking at sustainable wines. We're looking at different packaging. And when you're walking into these shops, all they have in terms of data and products is what's been there for the last 15, 20 plus years. So if as a consumer, you're seeking a natural wine, you go to some sort of a specialized natural wine section and there's 3 wines. And so that amount of information flowing back and forth, I think there are some attempts by some bottle shops to discover. And look, I mean, to all do credit to some bottle shops, some of them do have some really knowledgeable stuff, right? It still remains a subjective purchase. The challenge is that I agree with what Laurie is saying. The discovery of the product behind the bottle is actually very difficult. If
isn't
I'm
there a
interested,
problem that we don't want to talk to people anymore? I mean, isn't this a problem that we have? That
yes and no.
You know,
I mean,
the wine
yes and
expert
no.
is the best. It's always been the best. It has never been replaced, I think, by anything else. But we don't have time. We're like, oh, we got to go talk to somebody in this store and ask
some
them
of
their
these-
opinion, and they're going to ask us what we're going to eat. We don't even know what we're going to eat, and then you don't talk to anybody and you grab something in your price point and you leave. I mean, I don't know.
But I think
David?
some of these things that but I think that some of the things that like Seb's touching on, I mean, they're basic merchandising. Yeah, when I would go to the bottle shop near me, it's just categorized in a classical way based on region. I can't go in and find a display of like, you know, try out low weight bottle. Like here's some wines that are shipped in very eco-friendly bottles. And for me, as much as I you know, like to explore wines, especially at like wine events, it's just going to a shop to like to get me off of my daily off of my, you know, my house wine. Like what I need something more than, oh, try a different region. That doesn't necessarily speak to me and getting me to pick a different house wine or to try and experiment around and be like, oh, here's 2 or 3, you know, lightweight options. Be like, oh yeah, I'll try them instead of my normal 500-gram bottle.
Yeah.
And from a merchandising standpoint, for all the wine producers listening, I think the key takeaway here is consumers are no longer just looking for a red wine. They're looking for a sustainable wine. They're looking for a natural or organic kind of a wine. They're looking for a lighter bottle, something different. If you are, as a producer, producing something that's organic, something that's natural, something that's minimum intervention, make sure to put it on the bottle. Make sure to have each and every consumer looking at your website, looking at your bottle, to be aware of it, because even that level of information is hard to get by.
Yeah, and I think this is why you know, especially like the online, like not new, but like e-commerce like channels, like again, I hate to say always like Drizzly, but we've seen this one of these Instacart and everything, or Amazon in Australia, where you can buy wine. They ask, it's mandatory to enter a product to normally have a front image of it, but a back, because Amazon knows very well that all this type of information will be on the back label, and that is relevant to consumers. So it's really interesting, and what Oushinery has been noticing, and I know I talked about that a bit in a couple of earlier episodes, but some of these elements they used to be non-present on the label, then made their space at the back of the label, and then some of them start being visible on the front of the label altogether, like for like the, you know, like the in-store experience. So it's really interesting. Not that you want to placard that logo and certification everywhere. And some of those, when I say logo, like it's like to be like even like the official logo, but just like what you stand for, like, you know, like proudly female owned, you know, like you don't need the official certification, but it's just like it's a differentiator that will make sense to a certain category of consumers, that will you know, make the final decision between 2 different products and opt for your own, for example. So it's very interesting. I would encourage wine producers to, you know, think of like what makes them stand out that you already have that could be a differentiator, you know, in that way.
I was talking to a winery about 3 weeks ago, and they were suggesting that they changed their label. So you're talking about having like the female-owned attribute being displayed, right? And they have been using QR code for a few years now, and they've changed their label to put the QR code on the front, which if you think about it, a barcode or a QR code being on the front of the label, it's just traditionally, it's ugly. Design-wise,
Yeah.
it's ugly. But they changed that, and they actually noticed that people were scanning them more, and they saw an uptick in sales. And so I would definitely suggest to winemakers, to wineries, try something different. Even though you're not comfortable with it, if you need to change it next year, fine, try it at least, as opposed to adopting the de facto. So having that QR code at the front, we're suspecting at the shops, we're suspecting in different places where the bottle was advertised, people just naturally went, oh, let's have a look. Let's see what it shows, right? As opposed to having it in the back label, which requires the consumer to pick up the bottle or flip it around or do something with it. And you go to the bottle shop and never will you just flip every single bottle to have a look at the back labels, right? So yeah, lots of food for thought in this.
All right. So what about in restaurants, as you know, the cool kids from Tech Insiders call the on trade? Nick, what is there any? How is the restaurant experience? Is it in a good state these days? Can tech help?
Yeah, I think tech can help. I mean, I think at the sort of top end of the market, we see electronic wine lists coming in now. That gives a lot more scope to be able to tell quite a detailed story. It's unquestionably a training aid for the sommeliers as well as the clientele as well. And in fact, in most instances, it's probably more of a training aid for the sommelier that enables the sommelier to be able to engage with their patrons better. So, the patron might browse the electronic wine list. They sort of, they dig into the sort of the detail behind the listings. They ask the sommelier, what do you think? Do you think this is going to go well? And the sommelier says, well, what are you looking for? And then actually their knowledge has already been significantly expanded, and they're able to say, yeah, that's great, or actually, why don't you try this if you like that? So I think that's great in terms of technology. It works. We see it working in action within our setup at 67 Pall Mall. But obviously 67 Pall Mall is a very specific use case, given they have 4,000 bins on the list. Not many restaurants have 4,000 bins, and of course at the other end of the spectrum, it's just about the reducing down of things, the ultimate curation of a list that goes with the style of food and the menus that are put together. So how can tech help that? I don't know. I think tech can help maybe on the sourcing side, not necessarily in terms of the storytelling within the outlet.
Restaurants. Anybody else have some thoughts? Okay,
It's
let's
okay.
move on.
We can circle back on data, and the whole idea is, if as a winery, making sure that wherever you're selling your wine, even if it means to add a physical spec sheet in each and every case, make sure that everyone who gets your wine knows about the new style kind of attributes, the sustainable, the women-owned, all the small batches, the what was the weather like that year. You really want that information to just flow through to consumers, but also to the restaurants, right? It's not because they have a sommelier that they necessarily will be able to tell consumers, hey, by the way, this one are completely net zero in their production. And consumers are increasingly demanding that. So whatever information you have as a producer, make sure it flows out for sure.
Which brings us to marketing. Laurie, what are the things that your clients are looking at? What are you looking at? I know that Oushinery is going through a lot of changes, looking to the future, doing more. What is out there for marketing your wines?
I think like the biggest trend and a again, like that's a testament to the wine industry being a little bit behind is what we call like enhanced product content, for the digital shelf, and it's going beyond, the standard bottle shop, the front bottle shop. Like even that, as we know, it can be challenging for the industry to fulfill, to have like a nice representation, photo ID of your product you're selling. But like what we see, what we know, and where we see more and more wineries embracing is, I think, much more than that ID pictures and really having marketing-led product content, so that we know that as soon as you have like more than 3 images of your product in a listing, the increase in sale is drastic. You have just like much more of an experience online. Again, like Seb mentioned at the beginning, when like the shopper cannot taste the wine. So just giving like more clues on how the wine is going to taste or how it's going to fit in the person's life. So like the biggest trend we're seeing is like this enhanced, like more varied, more user-focused visual content of the product, more varied. So having like the same SKU, having a collection of visual assets would then be displayed not all at once, but relevant to the person's looking at the listing. So that's really interesting and really challenging, because at the end of the day, a wine, that's why it's so rich as a product, is a bottle of wine is not just for one type of demographic, right? Like the same bottle of wine can fulfill exactly the need, the want of like one consumer category at one point in time, and then another one somewhere else. So just like being able to talk and speak to this is challenging for the industry, but with technology, we can better fit consumers' lives. Yeah.
What about finding this demographic? Is this mostly a top-down thing, meaning, okay, let's make a wine for young women, young men, whatever, high income, low income, whatever? Or are there interesting ways where, kind of like what Seb was talking about in terms of discovery and everything, where you can find your market for your wines and discover, who to target?
Yeah, I think if you go too targeted and too much of an obvious branding exercise, people can smell the bullshit, and especially like the younger generation, and just be like, oh, okay, I'm being sold to. But I think it's a marketing exercise, and then I think that's also why RTDs are so popular. It's that much easier to experiment and see what sticks and like with what message, and then keep on producing compared like to wine that way. So it's kind of like interesting. Like I've talked about it before, but like Summer Water, which is like a rosé that was spun out of like the Wink offering, it's obviously targeted to younger feminine crowd. It's got like light pink and all of this, and it's a smashing success, right? Like it's just like, but it's been cleverly executed, and it's delivering on an affordable like rosé product that you can be confident bringing to your beach party with your friend. So it's like what we see at Oushinery is like some bigger wineries that would experiment with like sub-brands, so that consumers don't necessarily know that it belongs to that overall, to just allow more for experimentation and a bit more following the taste. And I'm talking not just like palate taste, but like consumer behavior, like habits and taste right now, to see what happens. And I think that's right now, like the low alcohol wine, that's what's happening. What we are seeing is like, hey, it seems to be a demand there. Does it need to like, what are we doing? How are we communicating this? Yeah.
Seb, what about for small wineries? I mean, how can they discover this? How do you see them doing it? Is it just taking a chance, following a trend? Or are there interesting ways where they can find their market or build a wine for a market? And I think Seb got frozen. Okay. He's stuck in Spain still. Nick, did you want to jump in?
Could you repeat that, please?
Okay, let's go to our next.
I heard Seb, and Sorry, I was sort of in a parallel universe to your point.
Okay, let's go to our final topic, production, and let's talk about also, with the idea of sustainable production, climate change, all of these topics. What are the problems that wineries are facing, and where can tech help here? Anybody got some ideas to start with? Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I think I might jump in. So I think that so we've been starting to work with the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, and for those of you who don't know what they do, is they are trying to establish a way of comparing different sustainability standards around the world, because of course what you can do towards sustainability is different in different terroirs, different locations around the world, and it's not always clear what a certain sustainability standard translates into. But what is quite universal is the interest in understanding whether wineries are capable of measuring their current operations and their current progress. So the only way that you can really do that is with some sort of technology support at that sort of production size, to be able to monitor, okay, how much water are we using, how much, what's our waste, what's our electricity, where is it coming from? There is a fair amount of bookkeeping to be done in order to monitor your current sustainability and to monitor improvements in your sustainability. Yeah, I don't think you just become sustainable without having tech be a part of that.
I really love that, this idea of like measuring the progress. It's also like very evolving. Like it's just kind of like it's very motivating as well. Rather, like, I mean, the certification, the stamp is like really cool, but like it's a final, like it almost doesn't take into consideration like all the hard work to kind of get there. So just like having this progress measurement year over year, or like that's really, really cool. Yeah, didn't think about it.
And I think what's interesting when you get into the topic is that just because you're certified, just because you have a selection of wineries that are all certified sustainable, it doesn't mean that they're all equally sustainable. I think that's something that that was very sort of eye-opening in getting into this topic, because a lot of the sustainability standards, they do focus on, or there's a large component about what is your improvement. So I think what some of the standards are saying is that this group of wineries have an improvement plan that meets our sustainability standards, as much as it means that, they're all having at least a certain amount of water efficiency, or they're all having at least a certain amount of renewable energy. That's actually not sort of a universal way. It is measuring, or a lot of people get certified through the implementation of a process that they will have to take forward for multiple years in order to become a more sustainable business, which I found very, very interesting. And it does make sense. Every business is at a different point, and you don't want to completely, shut out businesses who are trying, but coming from a very low hurdle. But you do need to give them some carrots along the way, and not have to wait 10 years in order to put a sustainable badge on their winery.
Yeah.
Well, those are our ideas for the next tech wine startups, and please steal them, use them. If you like some of the stuff that we're talking about and we can do, reach out to us. But good luck with your ideas, and if you want to run an idea past us, I'm sure that any of the Wine Tech Insiders would love to chat. Thanks again for listening to the Wine Tech Insiders. We'll see you all in a few weeks.
Thank you, David.
See everyone.
Bye.